Good evening and welcome to this presentation. Here's a little radio clip that hints at what's to come.
Welcome once again to Festive Phrases from the Radiolingua Network. I'm Mark, and each day of December, I'm bringing you a festive phrase in a different language. Today, I'm with Oksana, because we are learning Ukrainian.
That's right, everyone. This evening's presentation is about second language learning. I've entitled it, What Do I Have to Say About It? In this case study, I'm looking at the question, can self and peer assessment help to authenticate instructional design in this environment? A common means by which second language teachers, especially heritage language teachers, whose circumstances and resources are often the most limited, attempt to sort students in order to simplify assessment is to split their individual classes into groups A and B. This is usually done according to a blend of personal assumptions, sundry observations, and motley test results, and finally based on the dubious conclusion that certain students are more likely to perform better or worse in the language of study going forward. Speaking with such students, I've learned that from the first moment they begin to believe that they are indeed at a level of ability, and by extension capability, as indicated by these groupings. The one group, smugly ahead, the other coming to feel hopelessly in arrears. But on what grounds? Of course, there's no pedagogy in this, and certainly no design either of the learning or its assessment. The school and staff I've been involved with, K-11, avoid addressing assessment altogether, relying heavily instead on indiscriminate photocopied texts, question and answer or summary homework, and teaching to the test, requiring memorizing word for word. Hence, by the time the students commence their secondary level studies, they've become disengaged from their learning, and the gap between groups A and B becomes virtually unbridgeable. As a result, by the time they graduate, few of these students can put more than a few sentences together, either to converse or explain their thinking. Here's a little video that captures the environment.
Hey, did you know I taught Panda to whistle?
Oh, yeah, that is really cool. Let's hear him. I don't hear him whistling.
I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned how.
A staff member told me I try to have a balance of diagnostic, formative, and self-assessment for my students. However, out of a staff of 20 teachers, I feel that few of my colleagues are on board with these types of expected practices. If I can speak frankly, most of my colleagues will do the basics to make sure they are accountable for their report cards. In this Ministry of Education document from 2007, Student Self-Assessment, the research states, if formative assessment is to be productive, pupils should be trained in self-assessment so that they can understand the main purposes of their learning and thereby grasp what they need to do to achieve. Clearly, the solution and responsibility are in the planning and design. In 2009, when I began working actively with Ukrainian language teachers on new learning and assessment approaches, I discovered that the fundamental problem was that most everyone was functioning in isolation. As a result, there was no feedback or input from elsewhere to contribute to the instructor's personal and professional growth, that is, to their pedagogical competency. The body of research shows it is fruitful to work with a peer or colleague in experimenting with self-assessment. Such experimentation will enhance personal assessment literacy. The constructive dissonance, social comparison, synthesis, and experimentation that occur when working with others will have a significant effect on your learning and ultimately on your students' learning. Collaboration will help you more effectively link student learning and instructional approaches for the purpose of continuous improvement. Okay, well, if this is such a win-win situation, what is holding teachers back? I invite you to put some comments in the chat box on this as we go on. I'll take a look at them later. What is holding teachers back then? A number of very real, very human things. During the last few workshops I've been involved with, teacher participants expressed such factors as the fear of failure, not knowing where to begin, uncertainty about student response, and even parent, peer, and administration reactions as impediments to change in assessment practices and routines. However, involving these teachers as we have in PBL-styled scenarios has been successful at breaking this cycle. So authentic professional learning can lead to authentic student learning. You will see in the poster to the left from a recent conference just held a couple of weeks ago that they've addressed teaching and assessment practices, as well, if you can look below that, authentic tasks. This is the first time in our community. And this was set up through previous workshops, such as the one shown to the right, where teachers were put into mock learning and assessment scenarios, getting to appreciate what it feels like from the student's perspective when different types of assessment are taking place. I'll be happy to see what you have to say in a poll that I'll do on professional learning environments and assessment a little later. So just as discussion of the authentication of instructional design has steadily increased over the past 3 decades, brave efforts to bring it to fruition in second language learning have as well. What can self and peer assessment look like? Good question. Here's a few examples. And a fellow teacher of kindergarten shared her efforts with me. I lead small reading groups for guided reading, and each student within the group has an opportunity to self-assess by using a selection of stickers. Need help? Try again. I did it. Next level, and so on. We also ask them to indicate if it's too easy, too hard, or just right. In addition, students assess each other's work, asking, can you add something more to your writing or picture? They really enjoy this. We've also done assessments in a format where one child has an opportunity to be the interviewer, and we invite individuals into the classroom to be interviewed. Others can add to the interview with additional questions. Then the children recap the interview and have a personal picture and written component as an extended lesson, which can also be assessed personally or by the teacher. Our assessments are a bit non-conventional, but I have found through the 6 years in kindergarten that the children are more responsive, interested, and motivated when doing a self-assessment or a peer assessment. Another teacher writes, in my grade 4 middle immersion class, my students are engaged in co-constructing the success criteria for oral interaction. This helps them understand what they have to learn, and also helps them to talk about it in French. Since I've started involving my students in self-assessment practices, I find that they are more engaged in trying to speak French in the class. Here's an example of the success criteria generated by these students, with the tasks and activities on the left, and how they indicate where they are at on the right. Wow! On target, getting there, and working on it. So what are these efforts by these teachers telling us? I think these teachers are making a connection to a very important concept, and here it is.
Hi, I'm Ed Deasy. I'm a psychologist at the University of Rochester and have spent all of my professional life doing research on motivation that's in one way or another related to self-determination theory.
I'd like to venture that these teachers have made the connection with self-determination theory, namely the point that it's important to individuals to experience a sense of ability and social connectedness and choice in their learning settings. And that includes assessment. DC and Ryan, 2000. And my reflection on all of this is, so this means that language learners can use their background knowledge and skills to help them construct new understandings through assessment. And this leads to greater self-efficacy. And if I can give the opinion, and this too allows groups A and B to become redundant. A grade 2-3 colleague has shared her views in the following manner. In regards to students themselves completing self-assessments, I do this almost daily. Once a month, my students do goal setting as well. And once you've modeled what the expectations are, they're incredibly driven to achieve the goals they've set for themselves. I'd like to provide you with a little summary, recapping all the notions here and why these efforts work.
Students and teachers engaged in assessment for learning and as learning generate a continuous flow of assessment information through discussion and learning conversations. These interactions create a feedback loop that simultaneously informs teacher practice and student learning.
As teachers, we can also encourage and sustain these learning conversations by teaching our students the language and skills associated with peer and self-assessment.
Here's something to think about. And some nice Ukrainian music to think to. I've shared with you some insight into my experience working with second language learners and teachers, and the frustration of changing mindsets and practices concerning the authentication of assessment. I've also shared with you the turnaround in thinking and approaches that's starting to take place, including a still new but growing appreciation for authentic assessment, which recognizes the role of the student and of collaboration. Personally, I agree with Spanish researcher Carlos Monterrey, who quotes the aphorism, "Tell me how you do assessment, and I'll tell you how your students learn," to which he adds, "and I will know how teachers teach and how the school works." I'd like to leave you with a question which, for me, arises from these experiences, and that is, do you think that by changing the form of assessment, it becomes easier to change the educational practices and the institutional culture? Let's talk about it. Cheers. Don't worry, it's apple juice.